Cute, cuddly, and possessed by evil itself, there's something truly special about a game that doesn't take itself too seriously. Hey there friends, it's Codiak here, welcome back to Legacy Gaming. Today, we're diving into one of the most unique titles of 2022, Cult of the Lamb, a top-down roguelite with just a hint of base building to find out if it's worth your time. Cult of the Lamb is a game that immediately captured our attention here on the channel. As someone that's played and covered quite a few roguelites, I was ready for the next big game in the genre. Simply put, Cult of the Lamb is the roguelite to beat this year. When it comes to evaluating games, there's no rubric, no rule book that says this, that, or the other thing makes a game good or bad. What often helps swing the needle is originality, whether it's in its presentation, the core ideas, systems, you name it. If something is actually new, then it usually is viewed more favorably. Not to say the rest of the things don't matter, core aspects of the game like systems, visuals, replayability, just to name a few. But if a new idea manages to cut through the noise that is the gaming universe, it's bound to turn just a few heads. That's what Cult of the Lamb brings to the table, a blending of ideas that are so wildly ridiculous that they work nearly the entire time. But before we get too deep, I think a little appetizer is necessary. So Cult of the Lamb. Well, first off, the game starts by you getting executed, but in this case, death is merely the beginning of your strange adventure. Saving you from your mortality is the One Who Waits, a god imprisoned by a group called the Bishops. He promises to save you only if you start a cult in his name, build up a base of followers, and free him from his prison. Sounds harmless enough. As you might imagine, you don't really have a choice in the matter, and things get kinda crazy pretty quick. You set up shop in a little forest, and this acts as your cult's base of operation. The base building feature in the game is one of the many things that makes Cult of the Lamb stand apart as different from other roguelites. Not only are you chopping down trees and breaking apart rocks, but you're also building outhouses, constructing prisons, and worshipping at the temple. Its bizarreness is what makes it appealing, and while it's all pretty straightforward, it acts as the game's primary vehicle for progression. Between missions, you'll head back to camp, tend to your flock of followers, and continue your march towards fleecy greatness. I'll be honest, by the end of my time with the game, I felt this was getting a bit tedious, but for those Animal Crossing fans out there that happen to dabble in roguelites, you're gonna love this. Not only are some of the buildings truly wacky, but the interactions with your followers and the decoration options not only make this an important system for progression, it also acts as a reprieve away from the action and an outlet for creativity. It's really smart, made better by the game's absurd concept. I mean, seriously, it's hard not to spend just a little bit of time talking about that because it's what the entire game is built on. This absurd concept that you're a lamb cult leader recruiting loyal followers that will do just about anything in your name. And I mean, pretty much anything. You've probably seen the memes online about followers eating poop or being sacrificed in the name of the lamb, and those things are both true. The systems don't run incredibly deep, but they're all fascinating in their own way, which ultimately makes things more interesting. And to be frank, there are a good number of them. It's all for a purpose though, and while I mentioned that tedious word before, understanding how your cult functions is vital to your success during the action. As far as the cult, players have to be concerned with three things: faith, hunger, and sickness. It's simple survival mechanics, ones that are tied to simple, direct actions that you can take as a player. Hold a sermon in the temple, your faith rises. Cook some good food, hunger goes up. Clean up some poop, the chance of sickness goes down. Simplicity in design but clever in execution is how I would describe these survival-like systems, because honestly, how many games allow you to sacrifice a follower in order to increase devotion? Not many. I mentioned the cult base also acts as an important vehicle for progression, and I don't just want to gloss over that, because if you're only here for the action, this is worth mentioning. How you interact with your cult also dictates how strong you're going to be when you go up against the bishops. Drawing power from your followers at the temple allows you to unlock better weapons, abilities, and curses during your runs. Collecting faith from your shrine allows you to unlock new buildings for your cult, and building up your relationship with your cultists will reward you with commandment stone fragments, which you can use to eventually declare new doctrines amongst your flock, which basically give you new options for how you deal with things. Everything is tinged with just a hint of weirdness, which again helps the game stand apart. Every action and decision becomes second nature at some point, but the quirkiness of it all really helps keep your attention throughout. In my opinion, there are a few small things that just don't land, like the questing system. Occasionally, a follower will come up to you with a quest, and your options are really either do it and gain some loyalty from them, or ignore it and lose some faith. It's kind of a pain because those quests aren't really tied to your end goal, and they're not interesting enough to really take you away from that mission. Nonetheless, small potatoes in the grand scheme of the game. Managing your cult is one half of the equation, an equal half I want to point out. In fact, I spent more time managing my cult than I did actually dungeon diving, so take that for what you will. But the real meat and potatoes is the action, which is reminiscent of games like The Binding of Isaac, Curse of the Dead Gods, and Hades. There are 4 dungeons in total, and each is broken down into 4 levels, so 16 missions in all, with a boss at the end of each dungeon. Not massively big, but the simulation stuff really helps pad out the time between each run. Each dungeon has its own theme, which influences the type of enemies you'll face in each area. Darkwood, the starting dungeon, features lots of crawly bugs and bats. Anura is the land of famine, which features quite a bit of plague creatures. Anchor Deep is your more traditional underwater-inspired world with all sorts of creepy jellyfish things and a host of other baddies. And finally, Silk Cradle is for all those arachnophobes out there, a zone teeming with spiders, and more spiders. Personally, I like the flavor of each zone. I thought the enemy variety was really good, and when you work in the dungeon's procedurally generated layout and room design, I can truly say I never felt like I was repeating a room, and that's pretty awesome. You go into each run with absolutely nothing and are given one weapon and one ability to kick off your dungeon crawling. I found this variety to be really welcome, even if sometimes I was a bit frustrated with my combination. Some weapons are just balanced way better than others, and while you can adjust for pretty much everything, I was a bit frustrated that fate was dictating so much of my progression. As long as you manage to clear a couple rooms, you'll most likely run across one of the various NPCs that offer you some sort of upgrade or new item. Tarot cards act as permanent upgrades during a specific run. These are your lifeline to more power, health, speed, you name it. Beside the weapon and ability, these are the driving factor behind your success. There's also a weapon vendor who will let you swap out one of your current items for one of his. You could also just run across a room that rewards you with a new weapon or ability, but there's no rhyme or reason here, nothing in your control at least. Each map is a series of tiles that ends with you exiting the area and heading into another part of the dungeon. I can't honestly say which game used this method first, but I know for a fact Darkest Dungeon 2 and Curse of the Dead Gods both implement this sort of branching path map structure that I find really interesting. You move from one zone to the next based on what you need. Take the easy route through all the resource zones, and you might not have enough gear or tarot cards to take on the boss. Only go through the combat zones, and you might be going into a boss fight with just half a health bar. It's a balancing act, one that I enjoyed, especially because they weave in a few unique scenarios that allow you to do things like fight to unlock a new follower or select some free food to bring back to your cult. Variety is the name of the game when it comes to the Cult of the Lamb, and they really lean into that in order to keep the experience moving forward and interesting. Where Cult of the Lamb stumbles just a bit is in the overall combat system. Simply put, it's mediocre. Other roguelites have done hacking and slashing way better, and while there are some interesting weapons and abilities, the combat itself is just a bit lacking. If I were to point out a specific thing or two, I'd start by saying weapon balance is a huge issue. Some weapons, like the daggers, just don't hold up against some of the other types in the game, and while you can make anything work, there's a clear difference, and that's a problem. I would also say there are some design issues that make the combat a bit frustrating. For example, sometimes it's just straight up impossible to see when an enemy is attacking. Whether it's a visual obstruction or a wind-up issue that blends into the background, it can be a bit of a challenge, and this forces most players to just smash dodge roll until they're in a better position to engage. And quite honestly, that's not good gameplay. Without spoiling anything, I'll also say that the bag of tricks the developers lean on for mechanics is a bit shallow. It's a small pool of about 10 different types of attacks, and you can see that thread pulled through every enemy, big or small, throughout the game. Now, to be crystal clear, I don't hate the combat, not even a little, and those issues I pointed out aren't deal breakers, but they do cheapen the experience just a bit. If I were to really look at Cult of the Lamb as a complete package, I'd say the life sim element almost trumps the combat elements. That's not a bad thing, but there's clearly this struggle for relevance within the game. On average, I spent 3 to 4 more minutes managing my cult than I did running through a dungeon, so time alone makes it a clear favorite. But as I just described, the slightly flawed combat is really what's holding it back from being a true equal to the life sim part of the game. The game is built on its wild ideas, and most, if not all of that, plays out when you're managing your cult. Performing rituals, sweeping up vomit, plopping down buildings, it's all part of the primary experience within the game, and the rest, well, the rest is just gravy. One particular example of this are some of the zany characters and side areas you can explore. Each features a bit of character backstory, a task or two that you can do, and usually a shop where you can unlock new tarot cards or buy decorations. It all adds to the fabric of the game, building on its goofy premise, but also gives players something to engage in. What I will say for those that are interested in more of the action side of things, the game is replayable. Once you beat a dungeon once, you can continue to run through that dungeon in an ever harder gauntlet. Not much changes in terms of its function, but if you like scalable content, it's an option. You can also continue to expand your cult after the final boss is defeated. It's more of an open-ended conclusion, but gives players the option to continue on with their adventure, and I can see players that lean into the life sim side of things really enjoying that, tweaking every aspect of their cult until it looks perfect. Whether or not you lean into the cult side of things or the action, I think it's safe to say there is something here for everyone. While it might not be the best game I've ever played from a systems perspective, it's easily one of the most unique titles I've played all year and possibly in the last decade. Cult of the Lamb is a zany, wacky, unique, and bold take on the roguelite genre, and a game that's definitely worth everyone's time. If you found this worth your time review helpful or enjoyable, do me a solid and hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. There are still plenty of games coming out in 2022, and if you're looking for a new take on some of the year's biggest titles, we've got you covered. I also want to let you know that our 2022 Leave a Legacy charity event is set for Saturday, October 22nd. For a second year in a row, we've partnered with Connecticut Children's to help bring the joy of video games to kids at the hospital. Mark your calendars, set a reminder, and be sure to join us on Discord to stay up to date on everything regarding our upcoming event. The link, of course, is below. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.